It was a Big Ten tournament for the ages. Our Angie Holmes was there to cover all of it, and she joins us to talk about the proceedings. They didn't just mean something for the Big Ten, it's going to help dictate what's coming in the weeks ahead. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Well, hi there, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host, Howard Megdal. I want to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. You keep showing up for us the way we're showing up for you 6 days a week, over 180,000 of you in February alone. And of course, it is not just me, not even close. We have an incredible team at the Next. You're over to thenexthoops.com and you can see no fewer than 6 correspondents at conference tournaments across the country. Support the work. $9 a month, $72 a year. It's the women's basketball newsroom we've all been waiting for. We're waiting no longer. Let's keep building together, thenexthoops.com. And somebody who has been an absolute star all season long for us is Angie Holmes. Angie, who covers the Missouri Valley Conference for us, covers the Big Ten as well, out of Iowa. She was in Minneapolis this past weekend, seeing the proceedings of what I think has to be considered the best conference in all of America. Angie, when you think back on this period of time, just a historic period of time, for reasons we're going to get into that extend well beyond Caitlin Clark, what's the number one image that's going to kind of stick with you from those few days?
The crowd, the 18,000 people there, the game, the championship game, I think, it was a hard battle. We didn't know it was going to be that hard of a battle, but just
Remarkable.
the way everybody played, all of the teams.
Yeah, no
The way
question.
they responded.
And that Nebraska-Iowa battle for the ages to me. So we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark and this Iowa team, because the Iowa team up and down is being dismissed in a lot of ways as, oh, it's Caitlin Clark and only Caitlin Clark. And there's so much more to this team than that, as you have detailed all season. Throughout segment one, we're going to talk about that. Segment two, we've got to talk about some of the breakout teams at the Big Ten tournament. Nebraska, which made an unexpected run to the finals. Maryland with that huge win over Ohio State to solidify its spot in the NCAA field. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I just ultimately it's up to the committee. Segment three, bubble madness. We're going to get into Penn State and Michigan and what they did and what you saw out of them. But I want to start with that moment. It's the final minute of overtime. Caitlin Clark takes the ball up the floor. She and Iowa are trailing by a point to Nebraska. She comes through with that step back three-pointer to take the lead permanently. Iowa ultimately wins the title. Did it feel kind of preordained that it was going to end up that way? That Caitlin, despite uncharacteristic struggles, 0 for 9 from 3 in the first half in that title game, that she was going to shoot it, make it when that mattered. You've seen her for years. What was that like in that moment in the arena?
Well, for me, even when she took that shot, even after 4 years, I was like, no, don't take that shot. And it went in. So I should have known. But, she had struggled shooting, especially on that day. 4 points in the first half, but then 30 in the second half. So you can't count Iowa out if Caitlin's having a bad first half or even a bad first 3 quarters, because she'll keep on shooting. She's very confident. So yeah, it was I don't know if it was scripted, but probably the way it should have been.
It's so interesting to me, right? When people talk about this team as somehow Caitlin or bust, and we see even when she struggles that they are able to do plenty, and there's reasons for it, right? I mean, this is a team. If you go overall, they are at 119.2 points per 100 possessions. That is the best mark in all of college basketball. And yes, it is Caitlin's shooting, but I have long made the argument that if Caitlin Clark never took a three-point shot, she would still be a WNBA level player, whether it's her passing, whether it's her defense. There's any number of ways in which she affects the game. And so I'll take you a couple of plays down the line. That inbounds pass by Nebraska, who is the one who makes the interception but Caitlin Clark? This has not always been a strength of Caitlin's. This has not, frankly, been a strength of Iowa's. I can go back to her freshman year, and Iowa ranked 338th out of 349th in the country in defensive efficiency. I remember Lisa Bluter talking about the idea that we were an F defensively, but if we get to a C defensively, we're going to be really tough to beat. They've really done, I would argue, more than that. What are you seeing from Caitlin's defense and from Iowa's defense that has turned them into a capable enough defensive team?
Well, Caitlin leads the team in rebounds. I think people kind of forget that. She is a good defender. I think she probably does save some energy for the offensive side because that's where she shines. And the other players, they're playing with Caitlin Clark. So they're probably, anybody would be overshadowed.
No question. I do think it's interesting. You talk about she leads the team in rebounding. Now, part of that, of course, is because the center is now a multi-headed monster. Now, we are not in the time of Megan Gustafson. We are not in the time of Monica Zanano. And so I do think it's interesting. We saw her down at Maryland, start of February, and Caitlin specifically talked about the fact that she wanted to get centers more involved. Hannah Stuelke certainly took up that challenge. We've seen her elevate her offensive game. It was 5 days after she said that to me that Hannah Stuelke went out and scored 47 against Penn State. I just wonder generally, it's obviously a different approach with Jan Jensen and the bigs. Do you feel as if it is an approach that potentially helps Iowa come NCAA tournament time because they have more of these weapons here at the 5?
Well, yeah, Iowa's coaches always capitalize on their strengths. 5 years ago, it was Megan down low. So you pumped it into her. It was very much post play. And then when Caitlin Clark came along, it was the guard play. And Hannah Stuelke, she is definitely a different type of post for Iowa between Megan and Monica, who were wonderful. But, Hannah can take the ball, dribble. She's already shot some 3-pointers. So while Jan Jensen obviously is a great post coach, yes, she probably did have to adjust a little with Hannah and her skills. So, yeah, I think the coaches always adjust to what they have at the moment. And it's obviously working.
I just want to point out, this is not to slight Caitlin Clark as a three-point shooter. She's a fairly decent shooter. I think we can agree on that, right? I think that's a reasonable. I don't feel like anyone's going to be like, oh my God, that's a hot take. So I feel good about it. But I want to point out that within this Iowa team, the following players all rank ahead of her in three-point shooting percentage. She's at 38.1 from three. Kate Martin's at 38.6. Molly Davis is at 40.7. You had a terrific Molly Davis piece earlier this year at the Next. I highly recommend everyone check it out. Sydney Affolter at 41.3. Taylor McCabe, a bit of a specialist off the bench at 48.6. And even Hannah Stuelke, 4 for 8 from three, is capable of doing it. It feels like, and the argument I've made is that Lisa Bluter has essentially built her roster to maximize Caitlin Clark and vice versa. Do you feel as if this team is at a point where Caitlin Clark is maximized and her skills are maximized at the team level heading into her final NCAA tournament.
Well, yeah, I mean, her percentage is a little lower because she shoots a lot, because she has that green light. But yeah, when you got people like Kate Martin and Sita Fulter coming through, which they absolutely came through, and Gabby Marshall, who has been hitting a lot. They call her Gabby Marshall because even if she struggles a little during the year, come March and come tournament time, she's locked in and she can hit those 3-pointers. So there was a point in the game where Caitlin was down low, and for some reason, Kate Martin was wide open. She threw it to her, hit the 3. Kate wasn't having a great shooting game against Nebraska, but Caitlin even said after the game, I knew she could hit it, and she did. So I think Caitlin has confidence in her teammates, and they realize that.
Gabby north of 40% here in March, even though she's at 35.1, which is still very solid for the season. So bottom line, and we'll talk about on the other side about where Iowa is within the pecking order, seems very clear to me that we are talking about a team with a clear path potentially to the Final Four and as good an opportunity as anyone to win a national title. So we'll be back with Angie Holmes more in segment 2 to talk about some of the other paths for some of the other Big Ten teams as well. But first, I want to talk to you guys about eBay Motors, one of the sponsors of today's show. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. That's particularly important for me. I don't know anything about it. I just want my car to run. eBay Motors helps me do it. Because with eBay Motors, you have all the parts you need at all the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So we're back with the great Angie Holmes talking about the Big Ten tournament. And I looked into this, and Angie, maybe you can check me if I'm wrong about this, but there were other teams and players other than Caitlin Clark and Iowa at the tournament this weekend. Is that correct?
Absolutely. By the 5th minute of the 4th quarter, I was ready. I actually voted for Jaz Shelley as most outstanding player. You could pick an option of what team won,
Right.
and she absolutely would have won that most outstanding player if Nebraska had won.
It was a show. It was a show for Jaz Shelley and for Nebraska all weekend long. Some huge wins. I guess going in, because you obviously have been looking closely at this conference all season and really for several seasons now, how surprised were you at the level of play Nebraska brought here this particular weekend?
I wasn't that surprised. I was at the game in Lincoln when Iowa was up by 12 or 14 at the beginning of the 4th quarter. And Nebraska just whittled it away, and they won. They're a strong team. You can see it on their faces. You can see it on Alexis Markowski's face, and obviously Jaz Shelley and all of them. They've got a great freshman, Natalie Potts. So no, I wasn't surprised. And Coach Amy Williams said after the game, this is what we've been working on all season. Yeah, they'd had a couple, probably you'd consider bad losses, but that happens. So no, I wasn't surprised with the way Nebraska played and showed up.
Are you seeing something specific to Nebraska that makes them a tough matchup for Iowa? Like you said, there is that huge fourth quarter comeback some weeks back, taking them to OT here. I guess I'm wondering, did we find out that Nebraska can play with anybody in the country this weekend? And let's not sell them short. It wasn't just that OT loss to Iowa. They had to beat Maryland, who we'll get to in a moment, who was terrific this weekend and has been on the upswing. They had to beat Robin Fralick's Michigan State team, also impressive. They had to beat Purdue, plenty of talent, including freshman of the year in the Big Ten, Mary Ashley Stevenson. And so Iowa, it's their fourth game in 4 days, and they took Iowa to the final minute of OT. But I just wonder that distinction. Do you think they are now a team that can play with anyone in the country and is a threat to win multiple rounds in the NCAA tournament, or do you think there's something specific to the way they play Iowa?
Well, in the first half, they out-rebounded Iowa, especially on the offensive side. Markowski was always down in there. And they have so many threats, with Markowski down low and Shelley outside. But then, Markowski was 2 for 2 from the three-point line. So they're hard to guard, and they get the rebounds, and they are great defenders as well. So, yeah, I think they'll make a run.
It's fascinating. They are 7th in the country in defensive rebounding rate, overall 13th in the country in total rebounding rate. They have not been the most impressive on-ball defenders this year, but ultimately it doesn't really matter how you end possessions as long as you end possessions, and they've clearly found a framework to do it. Again, they beat Maryland, but Maryland did what they had to do. When Maryland lost to Iowa on February 3rd, they were 4-7 in the Big Ten Conference, and there were a lot of people wondering whether Brenda Friese's team would make it to the NCAA tournament. I don't mean to say I told you so, but I did make this prediction, and I made it publicly. You look down the stretch, they had a couple of games against Rutgers. They had some games that, as long as they won their winnable games, would make it very difficult for the NCAA tournament to keep them out. And then that win over Ohio State, one of the top 5 teams in the country, as far as I'm concerned, probably sealed the bid. What stood out for you about Maryland watching them this weekend?
I think I said in my story, you can't count Maryland out. 10 of the last 11 seasons, they've been in the Big Ten tournament semifinal round. Yeah. So it'd be a little hard to believe that they wouldn't be, but obviously playing Ohio State in that first round, they were ready. And I believe Kevin McGuff said that maybe they just weren't ready enough. So between, Shyanne Sellers hitting those 25 points against Ohio State, they're locked in. So no, you can't count Maryland out.
And again, Brenda always seems to figure it out. There's turnover. It doesn't matter. Brenda brings together a new group and finds a way for them to get key wins. And they always are very strong late in the season. You talked about Jaz Sellers, who obviously, she's been playing through injury at times over the course of this year, did not seem to keep her from finding another level. At this point, Maryland is likely going to face a difficult second round opponent. If you think they'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 8 to 10 in terms of seeding, depending on which bracketologist you follow. Again, another team where they beat Ohio State. And by the way, Jaz Sellers against Ohio State, we got to talk about it. 25 points played every single second of that game, shooting 9 for 17 from the field as she did it, coming up with 8 boards as well. Is this a team? I sound like a broken record, but this is just the quality of this Big Ten. Is this a team we could see in Portland?
Someone's
or
at the front door.
If we could see them potentially in Albany as well?
If they played like they did on Friday, and even Saturday when they lost to Nebraska, they didn't play bad. It's just Nebraska was so locked in. Yeah. And, as Brenda Friese said, it was the Jazz Fest with Jaz Shelley. So, yeah, I mean, if they bring their game and play like they did against Ohio State, they can go far.
It's going to be fascinating to see. I cannot wait. There are numerous Big Ten teams that need to be in the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about two that are going to be holding their breath come Sunday night in Penn State and Michigan in segment 3. Little bubble madness we're going to play, Angie, before we let you go. But first, I want to talk to you guys at home about PrizePicks, and this show is sponsored by PrizePicks, and there's something called Demon Time in PrizePicks. I don't want you to be alarmed, okay? Let me explain. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. How do you do it? Demons and goblins. Squares marked with the red demons or the green goblins get you different payouts. So now 100 times your money potentially comes with demons and goblins. And you can do it against some of your favorite celebrities, rapper Meek Mill, comedian Andrew Schultz. They're all available in the community plays under the promos tab. The thing to remember with PrizePicks is you're not going up against sharks. It is you against the projections. You pick any 2 to 6 projections, and if you get it right, they are your winning picks. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Locked On Women's Basketball is also brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? It's true. Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claims as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. So we are back with Angie Holmes. And Angie, Penn State, in a lot of ways, seemed to do what they needed to do as well, right? Penn State went out there, they won the game that they were supposed to win against Minnesota to finish the season, against Wisconsin to kick off the Big Ten tournament, and won that one convincingly. They lost to Iowa, but frankly, that was a game they were supposed to lose. Right now, depending on the bracketologist, Penn State is either just in or just out. A really interesting team, a team that suffered down the stretch. Ultimately, when you go back and look at if they don't make it, they're going to look at that away loss to Wisconsin and the home loss to Illinois, the latter by 15 points, as part of a 6-game losing streak that knocked them out of clear in the tournament perspective. When you saw Penn State this weekend, did they look like an NCAA tournament team to you?
I believe they do. I mean, I think all the Big Ten teams are good. You remember that Ashley Owusu was the Big Ten Player of the Year, or not the Big Ten, the Freshman of the Year when she was at Maryland.
Right.
And, you know, she struggled a little with injuries and has transferred to Penn State from Virginia Tech. And she's still a great player.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it makes everyone around her good. You know, she's real tough.
That Penn State team, really interesting. If they don't make it, that is a team that is a real legit threat to make it to the top of the WBIT. But we'll get into that, of course, come next week when we keep breaking down the brackets. And then the other team that just is on my mind, of course, is Michigan and Kim Barnes-Arigo's team, led by Layla Filia. You know, you look at what they did down the stretch. A huge win against Indiana that lost to Iowa, of course, after beating Minnesota and Indiana, making it all the way to March the 9th in this Big Ten tournament. did they do enough? Did they do enough? It's a hard thing to say. You don't see any kind of bad losses really on their schedule. They played a really tough non-conference. They played Mississippi. That win at Harvard is no slouch victory. Harvard's a top 100 net team, even though loss at Toledo. Toledo is a team really talented, 24-4. Tricia Cullip's team going to be a real sleeper when we get to the NCAA tournament. Did Michigan do enough?
You know, that Friday night game against Indiana, they were down by quite a bit in the third quarter and clawed their way back. And, Layla Felia I believe she had 30 points that night. And again, you can't, just have one player, but they do gel very well. So I think they did make their case.
Ultimately, to my mind, they're both tournament teams as well. I'd be very interested to see whether the committee agrees. We're going to find out on Sunday night. As a reminder, please make sure you are reading everything that Angie Holmes writes about Missouri Valley Conference, about the Big Ten, you name it. We are delighted to have her with us as a part of our team. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. We will be back tomorrow with a real treat for you. Gigi Spear in the host chair, and Ari Chambers, the great Ari Chambers, my friend to women's sports. Ari Chambers will be here as our guest. So until tomorrow, I am host Howard Megdal, wishing all of you a continued wonderful March and a wonderful Wednesday.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.